Welcome back to the Hoof and Fang podcast. I'm Kirt Graves.
And I'm Maz Maddox.
How's this week going for you?
Good. It's been good. I got a lot of writing done over the weekend, and I finished up the second Relic short story. So now I was able to officially kick that over to the edit. So now the editor has it. So I'm feeling very productive this week.
All right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm really jiving with it. How about you? How's your week going?
My week is going well. Lots of different irons in the fire.
Yeah.
I am directing a musical this summer, later in the summer, like August and September. And we had auditions a few weeks ago. We cast on Friday. All of the cast is accepted now. So
Nice.
That's now moving ahead. And I know August will be here before I know it. So add that iron to the fire. We've got audiobook stuff happening again for Hoof and Fang.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
We've got this podcast. I've got my other podcast with interviews to do. And you know, the job.
Right.
The job of narrating.
Right.
So just feeling very busy, a little overwhelmed.
Yeesh.
Had to sort of catch up after being gone for that week and get used to settling into a routine, but not really, because we're going on so many vacations over the next few weeks that we're not going to settle into a routine. Everything's going to be weird. But there was that feeling of when we were in New York, there was somewhere to go and something to do every night.
Yeah.
And I think last week I missed that. It was we're just
kind of just doing the
not
same
doing
thing
anything.
again. Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun.
So I'm having the post-vacation crash, just being overwhelmed by everything that has to get done.
Yeah.
In the next 4 months, 5 months. And just trying to keep my head above water and stay positive.
Yeah,
and I will just be going slowly insane for the next few months, and then fall will come, and we'll see what happens then.
Yeah, right.
Then there's just that election.
Oh God, I don't even want to think of that. I think I've been keeping the blinders up when it comes to that stuff. Where I'm just gonna do my day job, write my dumb little books, and everything around me is burning. But that's fine. I just won't look at it. It's fine.
Yeah.
So.
I will say I did take a break from my news podcasts and political podcasts while we were on vacation.
Yeah.
I took a vacation from that as well. But otherwise I still try to stay pretty informed, but sometimes there are days where it's
it's just too much.
Yeah. Shooting here, tornado here. It's you're just looking at the description of the podcast and you're I think I'm skipping today.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I get it. A bunch of bad shit happened in the world, and
yeah. Well, it's so easy too to just get stuck in that cycle, doom scrolling, and because it's everywhere all the time. It's just because everybody knows the algorithm rises that stuff to the top. So it's harder to navigate through that stuff, especially when you have a billion things happening in your life. You're already feeling overwhelmed and life is crazy. And then it's oh God, the earth is trying to kill us all the time. You know what I mean? So
I saw a video on TikTok today that was a Dollar Tree warehouse in Oklahoma that a tornado had torn apart.
Oof.
And it's, besides the damage that was done to the building, because that I can wrap my head around.
Sure.
It tore the roof off. It fucked with everything on the inside. Great. But to see the semi-trailers, fully, in places they should never be.
Yeah.
It's that semi-trailer got moved by weather.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
What?
Yeah. Did I ever tell you about when the tornado hit my neighborhood when I was in junior high?
I think you have, yes.
Okay.
But I don't know that you've told our listeners.
Okay. So when I was in, 7th or 8th grade, we had a really bad tornado that hit my neighborhood. And it was weird because my street was fine. Then 2 streets over, gone. It was insane, right? And so I remember we didn't have power for a couple of days and stuff. It was crazy. But when everything was back to normal, in quotes, me and Shen went through and looked at the houses that were decimated. And the most surreal thing that I remember seeing is we passed this house and just half of it was ripped off, gone. And the linen cabinets were open and all the towels were still folded inside. That was crazy. Right. I think that was the thing that clicked in my head. Not just the destruction, but the chaos of it all. I was like, everything else is gone. Chaos, random chaos of it, but the towels were totally untouched.
Folded inside the linen cabinet.
It was wild. But yeah, I mean, what makes it even more crazy is that
little do you know, somebody went through the neighborhood and did that.
Yeah,
just
right. Just to fuck with people.
Like, honey, let's fold these towels and put them back in the linen closet.
Why not?
It'll be hilarious.
Just troll the crap out of the looky-loos.
We'll watch teenage girls walk by and be confused.
And be like, what? Yeah. That was us. Because I just kept coming back and being like, that is fucking wild. But now everything's rebuilt. Like you never knew it even happened.
Well, that's what we do, right?
Right. Yeah.
Things fall apart and we rebuild them. Sometimes better than before, but a lot of times not.
No,
we don't like to learn our lessons.
No, 100%.
So we still have so many people living where tornadoes go like regularly. It's that's a choice.
Don't live there, man. Yeah.
Just like that, we have so many people who live in places where earthquakes happen and landslides and floods, and it's like, oh, okay,
that's where you want to be. I guess. Yeah. Some people are like, it's nice though, so the weather's really nice, so I'm just gonna chance it.
Yeah. Well, you know what we don't have in Wisconsin very often?
Tornadoes.
Yeah. Especially living close to like the Great Lakes, like
that is kind of nice.
Of the weather we have to worry about, tornadoes are pretty low on the list. Higher than a lot of other things, though. So, yeah. Sure. I mean, we're not worrying about earthquakes over here.
No. So. No, I've never experienced an earthquake, and I hopefully never do. I don't sprint towards that kind of thing.
No.
I'm not a danger seeker.
No. Yeah. Well, that was a fun aside about how the world is burning, and there's really nothing
and
we can do about it.
Tornadoes are creepy. Yeah.
What else are we talking about?
We have tons of things to talk about. Our first episode of Only Skin Deep is available on our Patreon. That's a good thing. That's not tornado related. Yeah. It's pretty fun. We've got, so the first episode's out. It's super fun. I already am so into the world and how the magic system and stuff works. So
it's the first 3 chapters. So we're like we said we were going to do. We're splitting them up into pieces that are between an hour and 2 hours long, depending on chapter length. So our first episode is out. It is in the Patreon feed for our dear listeners.
Right.
If you are not a dear listener, you can go subscribe, or you can wait until the whole thing is out and then you can buy it through our online store. That's also an option.
You've got choices. Make it easy for everybody.
Right.
But I recommend if you like serialized fiction or like you're really into podcasts, which I hope you are because you're listening to this. It's pretty fun to be able to have that like episode you can tune into every week. So it's something to look forward to.
Well, and I mean, I think we're getting so used to that again.
Yeah.
Like serialized storytelling was what we did for so long. And then I think we got used to binging things. And in audio, I think we've always been binging, but now we're kind of like creeping over. So I hope people like it. I'm enjoying I'm enjoying the fact that like I was able to do that work and then also my real work that I get paid for up front. Right. So like, that's helpful to me. For sure. I enjoy that. So far I'm enjoying this new process. Good. Hopefully we'll see. We'll see if the audience likes it. I hope you do. I hope it brings in some more people. And spoiler alert, those of you who are not subscribed at the dear listener level, stay tuned till the end of the episode. We have a special
we have a little treat
thing for you. So, and then we're also doing a giveaway.
Yeah. So I was able to get a paperback of the Cretaceous Crushes, the anthology that we put together recently. And it's a brick of a story. It's huge.
You can assault someone with this book.
So yeah, exactly. So if you'd like to win this assault weapon /book, we're doing a giveaway on our Instagram. So if you jump over, I'll have it go live on Friday. So when this is out, you should be able to just jump over to our Instagram. There's instructions on how to enter. But yeah, we're going to send out a copy. It's huge. I'll take a picture of it so you guys can see what I'm talking about. It being a literal brick. It's crazy.
It's huge.
But yeah, there's 15 unique queer dinosaur love stories in it. So if you are a Shifter fan, totally worth it. It's super fun. Plus, it's one of my stories is in it. So
I mean, we want to talk about that.
Yeah, a little fun.
So yeah, check out the post to enter for that giveaway.
Yep.
Oh, and then our little reader community has had some controversy.
Yeah, it's been a wild 2 weeks of just crazy stuff. I think the big headline one being Readers Take Denver, which was apparently a catastrophe.
Apparently.
Yeah, I
You were the
didn't
first one
go.
to break the story to me, but then I started seeing it all over the interwebs, and I was like, oh dear.
Yeah, I think Nora Phoenix went, and so that's kind of how I learned about it. Somebody who I at least dabble on Facebook with posted about how they had a great time meeting everyone, but then all of these things.
Right.
And if you want to just read the tea, there's tons of threads.
Not hard to find.
No, yeah, just you'll find it easily. But yeah, it was real bad. But it kind of got me thinking about book conventions and how, thankfully, I've never had a really awful experience. I've had
not like that.
No, not like that. I mean, like little things like I couldn't get a room or something, but nothing that was really anybody's fault. You know what I mean? It was just like, or like my flight was late or something.
I will say I have sometimes felt let down by conventions, but
that happens.
Now I have this to compare it to, and I was like, well, I guess I've never been to a true disaster.
Yeah, this was a disaster. Yeah. So, but yeah, it kind of got me thinking about going to book conventions and going as like a reader versus the first time going as a creative, like going as an author, you going as a narrator for the first time. So I figured we can discuss our first time going to book conventions and how that felt for us.
Well, why don't you start? Because you actually went to something that would be considered a convention as a reader, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, I went to my first big book convention was GRL, and I think 2017 or 2016. I can't remember what year is the one that was at Denver, which is hilarious. But me and Shen drove there, and I remember I was so excited because it was the first time I went to anything like that. And I was such a big romance nerd. I mean, I still am, but at the time I was like a new shiny thing. And we drove out there, and I remember she dropped me off because she was like, she's not into it. So she's like, you got fun. I'm going to go do hippie stuff. Like she went hiking, and I went right into this book convention. So I got dropped off. I didn't know anyone. And I was just like nerding out so hard. And I was so excited. And just to be around other people who loved my genre. And I got to talk nerdy book stuff.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even really started writing myself yet. I was just a reader. So it had to have been like 2016. So, but yeah, I remember just being in awe of it. And it was before their signing even happened. I was just walking around talking to people, and I was just so elated to be there and to be within the community, you know?
I think that's so great that you went to one of those by yourself. I would never.
Oh, really?
Never.
It was definitely out of my comfort zone, but I was like, either I wouldn't go, like I couldn't go, or I was just going to have to.
That's the option I would pick.
Yeah, you'd just be like, nope.
Like, nope.
Yeah. It was, when I walked in, I thought like I made a mistake because it was the dinner, like the first night dinner that they had. And I walked in, and like everyone was already sitting down, and I was like, I hate this. You know, I was like showing up to a dinner party late. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was like, I have nowhere to sit. And like, can I just go get food? I don't have my badge because I got there way after registration and stuff. So it was deer in the headlights. Like I was freaking out, but I just kind of like meandered over to the food and started making a plate and being like, well, if I get in trouble, I guess I'll just leave and never come back.
Or you would show them your confirmation email on your phone and be like, I'm legit.
Yeah,
I just got here late.
I'm sorry, I'm so scared. But yeah, so I'm really glad I just went for it, and it ended up being fine. I mean, I don't know if it's like this with all book communities, but within the romance or queer community space, everyone is so chill and welcoming.
Yeah. I
literally just walked over to a table, and they're like, yep, sit with us. And so I sat down and just made a whole group of friends like immediately.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Do you have any like highlights from that first trip that stick out to you?
So the big highlight, other than of course just being there for the first time, is I remember J.P. Kenwood, who's one of my all-time favorite authors. She's fantastic. She writes romance set in ancient Rome. And she teaches it, or like something professional in her real life. So it's not only
and then she writes smutty little gay books on the side.
Yeah, well, these are like epic tales, right? So they're
big
like
smutty gay books.
Oh my God, they're great. So it's like you'll learn all about ancient Rome and have a great time with these romances at the same time. So it's so good, right? So I remember I had been talking to her because I had fangirled out so hard. So when I was standing up trying to figure out where I was supposed to go next after eating, because I didn't know what to do, this lady like walks over and she holds up her necklace, and it's a little penis with wings, which is apparently a Roman thing. And I was like, JP? And she's like, yes. And I was like so excited. Like she saw me, I guess, with like wandering around looking terrified. And she was like, I bet I know who that is. So she found me and I ended up getting to hang out with this author that I loved for like
awesome.
the rest of the evening. We ended up like going to the bar and getting a beer and talking about like archaeology for a couple hours. It was so cool. So yeah, that was definitely the highlight. Yeah, experience. It was so cool.
Yeah. So here's the thing, because of my predilection for being alone, I have never been to a book convention.
Oh yeah.
Just as like a participant. Well, unless you count the GRL where there were no official narrator events.
Oh,
so I
yeah,
went as a participant, but like it was because I had signed up as a narrator and then they just didn't do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had been to like book events, mostly like readings and signings with authors I really enjoy. So I think the first one was David Sedaris.
Okay.
So I very much remember, I've seen him live a few times. I love when he reads. Do you know David Sedaris?
I don't think so.
The essayist, the humorist? Okay, well, would like him.
Yeah? Okay.
You will like him, yes.
Nice. Excellent.
He has a very dry sense of humor, very biting, very gay.
Oh yeah, so, for sure.
You'll enjoy him. And like so much of what works for him is when his work is read aloud, especially by him. Like he has such a unique voice and delivery.
Okay.
So like seeing him live or like when you hear him on NPR, like that's really the goal. And I've gotten to meet him then a couple of times because he'll usually do signings afterwards.
Yeah.
Just like tiny little interactions as he signs your book. Like that's it.
Yeah.
And then the other author that I went to see with my friend Stephanie was Amy Tan. I love Amy Tan. I don't know that I've talked about Amy Tan on the
I don't think so.
podcast. Like Madeleine L'Engle was definitely like my favorite author when I was a child. And then like as a young adult, I loved Amy Tan. I read all of her books. So
nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Her latest book though was like a nonfiction book about birds. And I was like,
what a departure.
Amy, my love, I have followed you down,
I might down like
every path you've gone, but I was like, I don't think I can follow you through the bird book. I'm really sorry. I just...
Well, I like reading about ornithology, so maybe that could be my thing.
Yeah. So those were the book events I went to as a reader, but I've never gone to a convention as just a person going to like any kind of convention.
They can be overwhelming.
It sounds terrible to me.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And I've been now, so I know that like, I know how I was even in a professional capacity, in a private capacity.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
That's totally fair.
Far too many people. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
well, I used to go to anime conventions when I was younger, and those are fucking wild. Like book conventions can be a lot, you know, like I think the GRL I went to, there was like 200 or 300 readers. That's a lot of people. But the anime conventions I went to were thousands of people. And like downtown Dallas, it was nuts. So like walking into GRL, I was like, oh, that isn't too bad. But because my bar was set like crazy high. But yeah, the first time we went to one of those when it's thousands of people, holy shit. Like you're sardines. Like it would suck because I know you're claustrophobic. But yeah, you're sardined into these like tiny rows and like alleys and stuff to try to get around stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah. And like I have also like in my capacity as like a salesperson when I was doing that, like I went to those types of conventions.
Oh, okay.
Like, medical professional conventions and technology conventions and shit like that. Same thing. It's like, wow, if I was not being paid to be here.
Yeah. Oof.
If this was not for work, like I would be avoiding this with every fiber of my being.
Yeah.
This is too many humans in one place. It doesn't matter that the place is like an airport hangar sized place. Like there's still too many people physically here.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And not enough bathrooms.
Never
enough bathrooms.
No.
Never enough food or drink.
Nope.
Like they make you buy their $17 bottles of water instead of just like having a drinking fountain.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I think they've since kind of changed it because I know a lot of the conventions that I've gone to recently have like little drink stations because I think because it gets so hot, people were just falling out. Like you have to have water accessible for people. But yeah, for a while, hell no, you're on your own. Yeah. It sucked.
So then we get to go to them as professionals. Yes. And what's that experience like?
So I had a much more relaxing time going as a reader because if you're going in a professional sense, you're on 100% of the time. And it can be really taxing, but at the same time, amazing. Like the first time I went as an author was GRL again in 2019 in New Mexico. First time I was ever like as an author. And I went and found my old picture. And it's funny now because my my table has since expanded because I've got more books and I've punched it up because I'd never seen what an author table was supposed to look like. So I went and looked at my original table and it's so sad, but I'm so desperately proud of it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, yay, look at my 4 books. The little table runner. It was so cute. I was so proud of myself. But yeah, I remember I was so stressed out the whole time, but it was one of those stresses that was just so bundled up in excitement that I couldn't tell how absolutely wore out I was until way after the fact. But yeah, I don't think anything will beat being at my table and have somebody coming up and being like, oh, I've read your books. I like your books and I want to buy them and have you sign them. And they were excited to meet me. And I was just so moved that they cared to meet me at all that it was, nothing will be able to capture that. Like if I could bottle that, I would be a millionaire. Like just that feeling of humble and excited. And it meant so much to me. And even now when because, you know, I've gone to a couple of these conventions now, but I think the last one I went to, this one reader came up and they couldn't speak because they were so nervous and they just handed me a sticker and I was like, thank you. And then they ran away, just full ass ran. And I was like, I want to hug you so bad because I can tell that you were that excited to see me. And I don't even think my mom's that excited to see me. You know what I mean? Like,
Why would she be?
I mean, my mom's a big fan of me, but like, it was just like, it was crazy. And I will forever be honored and love that to pieces. Yeah, there's nothing quite like that. Do you remember the first time you were
vividly. Yeah. It is burned into my brain.
Yeah. Was it
terrible that experience was?
Oh, no.
So it was GRL.
Okay.
2018.
Okay. Oh, I was there.
Yeah, wasn't that the one you like came and went in like 36 hours or something crazy like that?
Like a
you were
day.
literally there for like 10 minutes and you were like, hi.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly it. That sucks.
You just ran through the convention center one loop and were like, hi. I flew here from Texas for this. Bye.
That was nuts.
But I went to that one. It was my first one. I was there as a narrator. I had signed up for it primarily because TJ Kloon was going to be there and I had never met him. And he had been such a big part of kicking off my career as a narrator. And like a couple of other people I had narrated for were going to be there, but mostly I was there actually to like pitch myself. Like I was like, this is what I'm doing now. I need to go tell people, I need to be in front of people and convince them to hire me.
Right.
So I, first of all, spent so much time and money on merch and like, cause they also gave us a table.
Oh, like, that's right.
It was like, we would have times during the author signings. So we kind of had to do our own table thing. So like the drawer behind you is so full of that merch still all these years later.
Yeah, I remember
like
that.
I gave away so little of what I brought with me and ordered. And like I had the whole setup, but I was terrified.
Yeah.
So John did come with me, but he wasn't going to the convention. He was just like having a vacation.
I remember that.
Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah.
So he dropped me off at the convention center. I went in. TJ had not arrived yet, so I had nobody to talk to. I went to the newbie meet and greet thing. And I just remember like needing to get alcohol. I was like, I will not, like my hands were shaking to the point where I was like, if I don't drink a, let's say glass of wine, like I'm not going to make it through even this first event.
Yeah.
And so like I did, I had my glass of wine and like eventually calmed down and met some people. I remember very vividly having like, and this is how it started. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm not great at marketing. I remember very vividly having a conversation with an author. I won't say who, but like sitting and she found out I was a narrator and she was talking about, and for some reason she asked if my real name was Kirt Graves. And I was like, it is. And she's like, oh, good. Cause it really bothers me when narrators change their name to do gay romance. And I looked at her and I was like, is that your real name? And she was like, no. I was like, well,
yeah, what?
That's a bit, and I think I said like, well, that's a little hypocritical then.
Yeah.
And we didn't really talk for the rest of for the rest of that newbie meet and greet.
I mean, it's a good point.
I was like, well, you're using a pseudonym. Why shouldn't they? Now, that has nothing to do with my separate feelings about how I do think, regardless of how much we want to say it's marketing, that people who use pseudonyms for romance, likely that is somewhere in the equation that is nested in shame.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's a totally different topic.
That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, just like, I remember that moment so vividly and being like, well, we're off to a good start.
Yeah, exactly. We're probably not going to work together.
I just pissed somebody off and I've been here for 20 minutes. Good for me.
I mean,
thank you, wine.
It's a good point though.
Well, I mean, you know, so that happened. TJ did eventually come and I got to meet him finally. And he was so chill and cool. Like
I love him.
Immediately started talking to me about all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Like maybe including some things he shouldn't have been telling me. Like, cause I was still essentially a stranger.
Yeah.
I was like, he didn't know that I was trustworthy. Why is he telling me all these secrets? But oh well.
Nice.
So that happened. I also remember that like Raven Song had not come out in audio yet. And it was like so late, but it was not me. It was the publisher that shall not be named that was just like dragging their feet on it forever and ever. And so like I went to that GRL and people were like, where is it? And I was like, I don't know. It's done.
Yeah.
Stop yelling at me.
It's not my fault. Yeah.
I remember that. I remember doing readings for TJ.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember the actual narrator event, which was like the last thing they did, whereas now it's like the first thing, or like they do it even before the convention begins.
Right.
It was like the last event on the last day.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told to read for no more than 15 minutes. Or no, I think it was that we get 15 minutes, a reading, and some questions.
Oh, okay.
And like I was last in the order, or second to last in the order.
Yeah.
And so many people read past their 15-minute time limit and then took questions that like the moderator tapped me on the shoulder and was like, do you think your reading can be a little shorter? And I was like, I think I can get it down to like 8 minutes.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing like 8 minutes and one question. And then it was like, event's over. Sorry, goodbye. It was like,
oh my God. It's a bummer.
Yeah. So like, there were just a lot of things about that first one that I was like, well.
Yeah, could have gone better.
At the same time, that's when I met my first Clunatics and have come to love and adore many of them.
Yeah.
It is when I had similar interactions with people. Like it was a perfect storm of me being terrified to be there.
Yeah.
And other people thinking that they couldn't approach me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Please come talk to me.
Please come. Like I sat at that fucking table with all my fucking merch. And like,
and nobody
came.
Yeah, they're too scared.
And like, but like I found out later people were intimidated. And I was like, oh my God.
I remember.
How stupid. Because I was just sitting there with nothing to do for an hour and a half.
I remember us talking about how you're like, I don't think anybody knows who I am because I like nobody's talking to me and stuff. And I was like, really? That's shocking because in my circles, everyone knows who you are. So I remember us being at the bar and me being like, that's crazy.
Yeah,
and
that's how it felt.
Yeah.
It was like, nobody cares that I'm here.
Yeah. I remember that conversation, which is, we were both wrong. Right. I mean, it's just, they were just scared.
It was people were intimidated. And so not until I like stood next to TJ while he was signing books did people like engage with me for the first time. So that again, I was glad he was there. I probably wouldn't have gone if he wasn't.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, I got to be there for his last GRL. But yeah, most of that was just terrifying.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And I didn't really get to meet that many authors. We
don't have time during that. Well,
if you're there as a professional, like all your events are happening the same time as the other people's events, and it's like, well,
how are we going to network?
Yeah, we don't get to network. We don't like. So I didn't get any work from that first GRL at all, which was a shame.
Yeah, because it's expensive to go to those things.
Yeah. And you always hope that it pays off over time, and maybe it did. But yeah, that first experience was very, very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that we actually took a little vacation afterwards to go visit my friend Stephanie, who now lives in Virginia. She's getting 2 shout outs in the same episode. And like, so that I was able to like unwind from that experience of like going to that conference and being like, wow, but yet at the same time, knowing immediately I have to go back.
Yeah.
Like I have to try this again. I have to see if I can do it better. And then what was it, New Mexico the next year?
Yeah, 2019 was New Mexico because that was my first one.
Yeah. So,
as an author, rather.
Yeah. So crazy. It was a lot.
Yeah. It is. It's a lot. It's fun. Mm-hmm. I've got a new one next year. That's going to be a new con. It's a brand new one that's never existed. Mm-hmm. So question mark. Yeah. I have high hopes, but this one's going to be another brand new experience that's totally different, like group of people than I normally, because when we go to GRL, it's the same people typically, like the same authors, which is great because then you build up those relationships and stuff. But this next one's going to be, I know 2 people going so far, but everybody else is going to be new. So I'm like, okay, new networking capabilities. This is a whole new group of friends I haven't met yet, which is terrifying.
So scary.
So scary. So can't wait.
A shout out though to the readers who attend these conventions because they're why we want to go back.
Oh yeah, that's why I go. There's nothing like it.
Like a lot of the professional goals don't get met, but the fact that those readers are there and they're so kind and they're so excited once they realize they can talk to you, that's wonderful. Like that's the reason to keep going.
Yeah, 100%
for them.
Yeah, there's a whole group of readers who don't ever get to go to these cons because they're on the other side of the continent kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of readers that I didn't get to meet until I went to like Coastal Magic. What was it, 2 years ago in Florida?
Yeah.
There's a reader who I've been talking to since I put out my first book, and she's never been able to go to any of like GRLs and stuff. But this one was down the street from her house. So I was able to see her and give her a hug. And I was like, I've known you for like 5 years. Right? It's crazy, you know? So like those kind of experiences are why I'm like, yeah, I'll go to Portland. Yeah, I'll go to Atlanta, whatever. Like whatever these conventions are, so I can meet these people who I've been talking to for years. So it's fun.
It can be a lot of fun once you get past the super scary part.
Oh yeah.
My favorite was actually going with you and our friend Silas and Jess came. Like that felt the most carefree. Maybe it's because again I wasn't actually there as like a
you just kind of got to be relaxed
there as an attendee. But it was also because I felt like we walked into every day as a group.
Yeah.
So I wasn't there alone. Right. So like I think that also. That helps. That for people who might be listening to this and being like, yes, I too would never go to a convention by myself. Maybe don't.
Yeah,
go with
take
somebody
a friend.
You know.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Because I mean, Shin dropped me off for my first one because it's not her thing. But the next one, I went with Jess. I had a great time. Like I was freaking out because it was my first as an author, but it was so wonderful to just have somebody else there with you, being like, yeah, no, this is fucking scary, but we're in it together, you know. So yeah, there's nothing that can beat that. Or find at least one other person, but. If you can find a group, that's great. Yeah. That's super fun.
Because then you're already a clique.
Yeah.
That other people want to be.
We're too cool.
Like, look at us. We're a group.
Yes, indeed.
So I would love to hear from our listeners about their convention experiences. Were they scared to meet an author or a narrator? Were they scared to meet us?
Yeah.
That would be a weird story to tell. But feel free to tell us about it. What was your experience like going?
I want to hear about
or
it.
if any of our listeners are also authors or narrators and want to tell us about their experiences of being on panels or like having tables or networking.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it. Hopefully there will be no more experiences like Readers Take Denver. Hopefully they've learned their lesson. My heart really does go out to both the attendees and the organizers because both must be just going through it.
Yeah. Right, I know a lot of the volunteers were just put through the ringer. Like people who they weren't being paid. They were volunteered their time to be there. Were the ones who got stuck with the brunt of like everyone's ire. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah. Be nice to volunteers. That's another lesson we could take away from this.
Yeah. If somebody has a volunteer badge on, they are the true heroes. Because they're there just because they love to be there. Right. They're not getting paid. They're not getting anything from this.
So this week, we do not have an interview. Instead, we are hoping to entice some listeners to join us over in the Patreon at the Dear Listener level. As we mentioned at the top of the episode, Only Skin Deep, the first episode in our new serialized version of Hoof and Fang Audio, came out this week. And after this conversation, you are going to hear the first chapter of Only Skin Deep.
Yes.
And we hope you love it, and we hope you want to join us over at the Patreon. But if you love it and you're not ready to join the Patreon, you can also just keep an eye out for it. In about 5 to 6 weeks, it will be in our online store as a complete audiobook.
Indeed.
So, Speaking of subscribing, go check out all of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, especially Instagram, because we have that giveaway.
Yep.
And then, as always, find us on Patreon.
Yeah.
Come join the fun over on Patreon. There's cool things going out every week. The serialized audiobook is just the latest thing. There's works in progress. There's our Animorphs episodes. There's polls and questions and access to us and all the good things. So we hope people will find us there. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So with that, we will leave you. Here is the first chapter of Only Skin Deep. Chapter 1. Mondays were the worst. For that reason, Luca Galeotto typically took them off. The weekends were always the busiest, with Enchanted Ink full of people and the energy high. He fed off that chaotic vibe. The shop was full then, between clients coming and going, and the looky-loos checking out the binders full of artwork or scanning the bright runes covering the walls. Mondays were like walking into a morgue. Yet there he was, walking in on his day off. For a good cause, he reminded himself. The best of causes. The bell above the lintel rang as he opened the door around noon, and it was as bad as he'd expected. The lone pair of tourists in the waiting area turned to gawk at him instead of the runes on the walls. The first-floor apprentices were lollygagging about, most of them lying across their tattoo chairs, reading on their phones, or simply staring into space. One noted his glare and started an avalanche of greetings sent his way. Luca offered a nod and a wave to the apprentices, and then snarled playfully at the couple staring at him as he passed. He sidled up to the front desk where Atlas, their receptionist and researcher extraordinaire, hooked a thumb toward the elevator, never looking up from the screen of his phone. "She's early." Luca chuckled, grabbing the messages Atlas slapped on the counter for him. "She always is." Atlas barely glanced up from whatever he was watching. "I took her up. She's waiting in your studio." "Thanks." He scanned the little slips of pink before glancing up. "How'd she look today?" "Tired." Atlas finally gave Luca his full attention, his standard scowl relaxing. "Be prepared." Luca steeled himself, worried about what he might find when he arrived in his private studio. The front door swung open, sunlight spilling in. Their gawkers disappeared, and another couple entered to take their place. He observed the apprentices and whipped his head in their direction, giving them his best "somebody help them" look. Doyle was the first who jumped up and shuffled toward the couple. He gave Luca a grin and a wink, ever the flirt. "That boy has the hots for you," Atlas murmured. "Yeah, well, the feeling isn't mutual." Luca had never responded to Doyle's flirtation, and wouldn't, especially after Ash mentioned it. If it was overt enough that his mate noticed, then it wasn't all in his head as he'd originally chalked it up to be. Now Atlas? "If you want me to, I'll tell him to lay off." "Nah, leave it be for now." He wasn't sure if mentioning it might make it worse. The guy would eventually get the hint, right? Although it had already been months. Luca lifted his gaze to Atlas, ignoring the situation. "Who's watching the kids today?" Luca probably shouldn't have asked. He didn't want the job. The apprentices wore him out with their constant barrage of questions, but it didn't appear anyone was keeping tabs on them at that moment. "Cassius. He's around here somewhere." "Cassius? Why's he doing it?" Their strong-willed leader rarely took the apprentices under his wing anymore. He was often too busy with other matters. One of Atlas's brows rose, his gaze trained on his phone. "You want to take over?" "Nope. Better get upstairs." "That's what I thought," Atlas yelled over one shoulder as Luca escaped toward the elevator. He reread the messages in his hand as he waited while the elevator beeped along its descent. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. Doyle. Again. Turning his back, he focused on the messages. A new client and a returning one ready to get onto his schedule. The elevator door opened and he walked inside, ignoring the stare he sensed on his back. As soon as the doors closed, he breathed easier. Maybe I should have Atlas speak to him. Better yet, Ash. A smile flashed across his lips at the image of his mate, judiciously threatening Doyle into compliance. Luca traveled up to the third floor where his private studio was located and jumped off the elevator. Only apprentices worked the first. The master tattooists each had their own private studios on the second and third. Once in his, he discovered Mrs. Stevenson napping in his tattoo chair. He stood in the doorway and smiled, deciding to let her sleep a little longer. Atlas had been right. The heavy, dark circles under her eyes stood out even more against her pale alabaster skin. She'd lost weight, he was sure of it. Her cheekbones were sharper, her clothes baggier. After a deep breath to calm his nerves, he washed his hands and arms, prepped his tools and inks, and whispered an ancient rite for strength before gently waking her. "Oh," her lashes fluttered as she sat up. "Did I doze off?" Luca sat on the rolling stool beside his chair. He gave her his most winning smile, refusing to show a single ounce of the concern he felt screaming in his veins. "It's all good. Gave me time to prepare." He smiled. "How are you doing? It's been a while." "I'm doing well," she clearly lied. "How are you?" Luca bit his tongue a few seconds before speaking. All of his life he'd been accused of being too blunt. Diplomacy wasn't in his DNA, so he avoided confrontation unless it was absolutely necessary. For her, he'd do his damnedest to avoid being insensitive and not call out her fudging of the truth. "I'm good, thanks. I assume we're back for a touch-up?" "Yep," she murmured, unbuttoning her blouse without further preface. She swept it open, no longer ashamed of the thickened mastectomy scars she bore. He surveyed the tattoo he'd created where the swell of one breast had once been. The faded lines were so faint that they were practically gone, and he knew then that she was not fine at all. Biting the inside of his lip, he fought the frown coming to his face, sure he lost the battle. "You should have come in sooner." She turned her face away. "I know." "Why didn't you?" "Life, it got in the way. I've had my hands full with my family." He sensed it was a lie, or at best an exaggeration of the truth, but wouldn't press her further. It would do no good. Only the touch-up would. "At least you're here." He forced a big smile. "Ready?" "I am." He adjusted his chair before he went to work. Luca laid the first black line along the upper swell of Mrs. Stevenson's chest, reconstructing the faded tattoo he'd given her at least 6 times before. The first experience had been uncomfortable. Seeing his old 7th-grade teacher with her shirt open was not what he ever would have envisioned while sitting in her class all those years ago. But then, there was no way he could have imagined where his life would take him back then. For the next 4 hours, Mrs. Stevenson chatted about the general state of the world, her kids, her grandchildren, and her neighbor's adorable dog that came to visit her every afternoon since she'd become ill. A visit she was sadly missing because of their appointment, and how much she missed teaching since she'd been forced to retire. Luca talked very little. He poured his heart and soul into that tattoo, giving her everything he had to spare. She deserved that, and more. When it was done, he coated his work in the soothing salve Oz made right there in the shop. She wouldn't need anything else. He was a healer. His tattoos mended within minutes. He helped her from the chair and led her to the full-length mirror hanging on the back of the door. One recessed light flooded the spot, illuminating the swirling lines of his refreshed work. It was new again, pulsing with life. Her eyes misted over as she eyed his work. "Beautiful. As always." He struggled with his own emotions. Mrs. Stevenson had been his safe place. The thought that she wasn't safe nearly broke him. The cancer grew too powerful. She turned to wrap her arms around him and hugged him tight. "I adore you. You know that, right? Luca swallowed the lump in his throat. Back at you, he said, his voice catching. When she stepped back to smile up at him, he noted a bit of her color returning. The circles under her eyes didn't seem as dark either, but that might only be his imagination. He was desperate to see her well. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small coin bag. I realize it's not much, but I want you to have this. Please take it this time. No, Luca murmured, lifting a hand. He sensed the gold and silver inside. Pure. You keep that and spend it on your grandkids. Her hand dropped. Luca, I'm aware all magic comes at a price. Luca watched the swirling magic of her tattoo, the glow brightening as it settled over her skin. Yes, all magic had a price, but she wasn't paying it. She would never pay it, at least not from him. I won't take your money. If I'm not paying the cost, I understand who is. Lucas smiled, refusing to reply. Mrs. Stevenson's entire family was witches, one of the chief covens in Salem. Generations of her ancestors, her parents, siblings, cousins, all had powers. Powers which she did not possess. It had long ago placed her in the role of outcast. She'd gone about her life as a normal human. Instead of joining one of the associated guilds, she'd become a teacher because she loved children. That had been the second black mark in the eyes of her family. The third, when she'd married a normie and started a non-magical family, had sealed her fate. They'd exiled her and her bloodline, leaving her adrift in a city filled with her own kin. Years later, Luca, the scrawny little witch, and an outcast himself, had come into her classroom, and she'd sensed his power almost immediately. While she didn't have her own, she sensed it in others. Instead of hating him for having what she lacked, she'd protected him, particularly after noting the bullying he'd gotten from his witch and non-witch peers. Being a healer and only 12, he hadn't had the experience yet to develop his secondary talents like battle magic and protection. Sure, he could heal a bird's broken wing or make a cut disappear, but that only served him after he'd had his ass beaten, although it confused the hell out of the normies when he never seemed to wear their bruises and split lips very long. Mrs. Stevenson had intervened more than her fair share to keep him safe. She'd allowed him to stay in her class during lunch or after school or whenever he'd felt unsafe in order to keep him away from his tormentors. Not just that year, but the years that followed. She'd switched grades and moved to Salem High the very year he'd transitioned there, and while she said it wasn't because of him, he still thought it had been. Luca, I won't let the burden fall on you. She placed the bag in his palm and wrapped his fingers around it. Take it, please. He took it, with no intention of keeping it. While she watched, he tucked it back inside her purse. No. Luca. Luca chuckled. Why? Will you at least tell me that? Why do you refuse to let me pay? And don't give me that line about it being a service to the community. I'm one person. Every single time he'd tried to tell her, he'd grappled with what to say, or speak past the lump in his throat, just as he struggled with one again. Something told him not to hold back any longer. She might not have much longer. Luca coughed to clear his throat. Do you have any idea how many times you saved me as a kid? She searched his face, and she'd likely lost count herself, though she probably didn't consider it saving. In her mind, she'd simply been doing her job. If that was the case, other teachers would have intervened, and most hadn't. I'm only repaying the favor. Mrs. Stevenson scoffed. Apples and oranges. I don't have magic. Oh, but you do, Luca whispered. She frowned, gazing up at him. He lowered to his stool so they were closer to eye, and to give him a few more seconds to consider his words. Her eyes glittered with tears, and he fought to hold his own back. What you don't seem to realize is your magic is unadulterated compassion. You gave freely of your magic to kids like me for 40 years, Mrs. Stevenson. I will forever be in your debt, and I bet I'm not the only one. I'll give you 1,000,000 tattoos if it keeps you here, pain-free, for a little while longer. Fat tears hung on her lashes. Luca. She wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him tight. He brushed his palm over her back, closing his eyes. He drew in her scent, the same jasmine perfume she'd worn since he was a child. There were so many memories, both good and bad, wrapped within that scent. He was suddenly 12 again, washing chalkboards in her classroom, listening to the radio play. She sat at her desk, grading papers, all while humming along to whatever tune came on. From his vantage point, he saw his bullies outside the windows glaring at him. He'd been untouchable in her classroom. Even his mother hadn't made him feel as safe as he had there with her. I also recognize you've waited too long to come back to me, he added when she stepped back. And I fear it's because I wouldn't take your gold. She refused to meet his eye, and his gut told him that he was right. Do not wait next time. As soon as this one fades, call the shop and make your appointment. Atlas knows to make room for you as soon as possible. If only she'd come to him sooner, before the aggressive breast cancer had ravaged her body. Had he known, he might have been able to cure her. But she'd gone the traditional medicine route, which had allowed it to metastasize. She hadn't gone to her family either. She'd had too much pride within her to ask for their help. Finally, she'd ended up in his chair. Too late. His tattoos could only buy her more time, and that time was soon coming to an end. The first had lasted almost 2 years. The last one had been done 6 months before, and was almost gone when she'd arrived that day. I won't wait next time. I promise, she murmured. Good, he said, before rising and helping her settle her blouse over the tattoo. Once she'd rebuttoned everything into place, he grabbed her purse and offered his elbow, which she graciously took. He led her out of his private studio and toward the elevator, hitting the down button. Luca spun to face her, searching her face. Her color was definitely improving. He breathed easier. Did you hear about Ronnie Smith? His ears perked up. Ronnie had been the worst of his bullies growing up. I try my best to never think about that shit stain. Well, that's inmate shit stain to you. Luca chuckled. He finally bullied the wrong person. Yep, from his parents' basement. Brittany says he's a troll online, whatever that is. He was caught stalking and harassing some 15-year-old girl in Boston. Sheesh, Luca murmured. I suppose I shouldn't gossip, Mrs. Stevenson said, grinning. But I thought you might appreciate knowing karma got a hold of him. The girl is okay, Luca asked. Physically unharmed. Perhaps rattled, but I'm sure knowing he's in a cell gives her some peace. Mrs. Stevenson straightened her spine as they neared the first floor. On the topic of Brittany, you get to meet my granddaughter. She's picking me up today. She just got her license. Mrs. Stevenson clicked her tongue and pursed her lips, a familiar expression when a student was bugging her. Pray I make it home in one piece. Luca laughed. Well, if you do crash, that tattoo of yours will help prevent anything too bad from happening. Can you give her one, too? Luca laughed. That bad? She's getting better, but her impatience. Ugh. Were you much better at 16? Luca asked. I know I wasn't. The bell dinged and the elevator doors opened. No, I wasn't much better. She whipped her gaze to Luca. But don't tell her that. Luca chuckled as he escorted her into the waiting area, where a tiny, younger version of Mrs. Stevenson sat in red plaid, ripped jeans, and a snarl. That snarl transitioned into a look of shocked awe when he appeared, leading her grandmother closer. She rose, her bottom lip falling, with eyes wide. "What? You've never seen a 6.5-foot-tall tattoo artist before?" she asked her granddaughter before giving him a wink. She leaned in close and whispered, "He's also a witch." Luca hadn't been sure her eyes could have gotten any bigger, but he'd been wrong. "Luca, this is my granddaughter, Brittany. Britt, this is Luca." "Hi," he said, but got nothing in response but an open-mouthed stare. He handed the girl Mrs. Stevenson's purse. "Not sure what you're lugging around in there, Mrs. S., but you're stronger than you look." He leaned down to eye the girl. "Drive more carefully. Patience is a virtue." Uh-huh, she said, slowly recovering. As he rose to his full height, he noted her face grow pink, as if she realized her reaction. She cast a look around before becoming suddenly flippant and tossed out a, "Dig the purple hair." He ran one hand through the tousled mess. "Thanks." "So, when can I get a tattoo, Grams?" "When you're 18, Luca and Mrs. Stevenson both said in concert. Her face fell. "As if I'm any more adult because I hit a certain number. It's less than 14 months away." "If your grandmother tells me you take fantastic care of her, I'll give you a free one on your 18th birthday." Her gaze flipped to his. "Oh?" She was clearly interested. "By good care, I mean your love, time, and attention. As much as you have to give her." Luca sensed Mrs. Stevenson might not have much more than that before the cancer won. Hopefully he was wrong. If he could ensure she wasn't alone in the end, he'd give away 100 free tattoos to every single one of her grandkids. "Hey man, I already drive her all over for her appointments and shit," the girl said. "Language," Mrs. Stevenson whispered. The girl offered a recalcitrant smile. "Yes, Grams." Mrs. Stevenson took one of Luca's hands and squeezed it with affection. "I always knew you were a good kid. Now I know you're a wonderful man." Luca brought her hand to his mouth and kissed the back of it. "Tell Ash I said hello. The two of you should come over for dinner one night. I make a mean lasagna." "We'll do that," Luca said. "Just remember we have enormous appetites." "Who's Ash?" Brittany asked. "Luca's boyfriend. He's a police detective." Brittany's brows rose. "And he's gay? Damn, Grams. I didn't realize you had such cool friends." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Mrs. Stevenson said, wrapping an arm around her granddaughter's shoulder and leading her toward the front door. Before they exited, Mrs. Stevenson turned and gave him a heartbreaking smile, and was gone. Before he could turn around, another client stormed through the door. Shit. "This last tattoo did not work as expected." "Oh? I asked you to fix my problem, and now I have a new one." Erectile dysfunction had been the problem. Luca wouldn't normally have taken on the tattoo, but the guy had come in with lots of gold and an attitude, assuming he could buy whatever he wanted from them. The fact a human knew about their enchanted tattoos had been an issue, and typically he would have wiped the guy's mind and sent the dude packing. But Luca had been in one of his moods, and ready to teach the guy a little lesson. "Can you not get it up?" The guy's face turned beet red. "Well, yes, I can, but—" "But what?" He lowered his head and ran a hand through his hair. A clump of it came out. "My hair's falling out." "And you assume that has something to do with my tattoo?" It absolutely did. Luca sensed it. "It started coming out in clumps that very night. It has to be a side effect. What did you do to me?" Luca shrugged. "I told you that magic has a price." "I paid you." "You paid me for my time and my talent, not the magic itself. The universe often takes its own cut." "You didn't tell me that. Fix it." Luca surveyed the bald spots. "Which would you rather have? A working dick or a head full of hair? Red splotches spread over the human's face. Both! Sometimes you don't get that choice, Luca murmured. If you weren't an asshole, you might still have your hair. For a righteous person who was exceptionally kind, magic's price might be nominal. If someone was a dick, the cost was considerably steeper. Most people fell somewhere in between. But not this guy. He was full on in the asshole zone. I will ruin this place, the man fumed. I'm going to sue and make you rue the day you fucked with me. Rue the day, will I? Luca grabbed the man's upper arm and tugged him into the supply closet nearby the door. He allowed magic to swirl in his hand and illuminate the darkened space. Will I rue the day? After allowing the magic to flow and grow larger, Luca shot the purple ball of light. It transformed into manacles mid-flight and pinned him to the wall. The man's anger immediately dissipated. I didn't mean. I was only babbling. I wouldn't do anything. I mean, you guys are powerful, and I know better than to come after you. Luca released another ball of magic, and it reached out, wrapping about the man like tentacles before they tightened painfully. Hey, man, stop! I won't say anything, I swear! When you were here the last time, I put a spell on you that prevents you from telling anyone about me or this studio. The illuminated tentacles and manacles brightened the man's face, revealing terror and dread in his expression. That's why I couldn't tell Miranda. And you won't ever be able to. Luca took a step closer. Do you want to know why I did your tattoo? No. It wasn't the bag of gold you'd been tossing about. It was to show you that money doesn't buy everything, and it doesn't allow you to treat people like shit just because you have more of it. The guy nodded, pale against the swirling purple magic still enveloping him. I'm sorry. Be happy I don't remove the magic and leave you hairless and limp. The man opened his mouth to argue, but Luca waved his hand, and the tentacle tightened around the man's throat to end any debate. He clawed at the tentacle, unable to pry it loose. If you were a better person, perhaps your hair would grow back. It was likely too late for that, but who knew? Maybe the guy could salvage a few strands. And when I mean a better person, think Dave Grohl level better. With a wave of Luca's hand, the magic faded into a puff of smoke. I'm sorry. You're right. I should be a better person. I will be. Don't care. Just get the fuck out of here and never come back. The client hightailed it out of the closet and nearly fell on his way to the front door. Luca chuckled to himself from his perch at the supply room door. The smile evaporated when his knees wobbled under him. He reached for the door frame to hold himself aloft. After a beat or two, it passed. So soon after putting so much of his power into Mrs. Stevenson, he had had little in reserve to create another spell right on the heels of that. He needed time to regenerate. After a cleansing breath, he rose to his full height and sensed he was okay. Ambling out, he crossed to the receptionist's desk and leaned against the surface. Atlas still had his eyes glued to his cell phone. Atlas, a little help with that would have been nice. Atlas never glanced up from his screen. He marched in and flew right to you. I didn't have time to intervene. Plus, it looked like you had him in hand. From the way he ran out of here, we're good. A voice came from the phone. This is one of my favorite forms to make. It's so relaxing. I could sit here all day long and make these one after the other. The hairs on the back of Luca's neck rose, piquing his interest. What's so fascinating there? This Potter on TikTok, he's amazing. I'm obsessed. He does live streams when he's working the wheel in his studio, and it's just mesmerizing. I could watch all day. Atlas turned the surface of the phone for Luca to peek. And not just because he's hot as hell, either. There's just something about him. I think we need to get a few of his medicine bowls for the shop. Maybe even get some in to sell. A handsome, dark-haired guy sat behind the wheel in an old, torn muscle t-shirt and shorts, coated from head to toe in specks and splashes of wet clay. his tanned hands coated almost to the elbow. It was hard to determine his height from a seated position, but his legs appeared long, lean. His arms were toned but not overly muscled. When he lifted his amber gaze to the camera, Luca's chest tightened. "This batch should be ready and up for sale in my Etsy store soon." The guy leaned toward the camera, squinting slightly. "Yes, Marco65, these are a little larger than the last mugs I did. These are for real coffee fans who need a bigger cup." The guy smiled, chuckling, and a dimple formed. Luca's entire body took notice, especially his inner arm. When he turned to eye it, his mate's mark tingled painfully just before it grew a nub, the beginnings of a third swirl of the triskelion. His gaze drifted back to the screen. Could he be their third? He'd need to see Ash and share the good news. "Shoot me his info. I'll get in touch about the bowls." "I can do that," Atlas murmured. Luca showed Atlas his forearm, pointed at the nub. "Allow me." Atlas's eyes widened, a hint of a smile on his lips. The expression was almost terrifying. Atlas rarely smiled. "I'll shoot you his info." Luca headed for the front door with a wave. "And just remember, you wouldn't have found him without me," Atlas cried as he walked out.